Dear patrons, our next presenter's name is something I like to consider myself when I get a little cocky. It can also be easily used to describe the dominance of a certain Serbian tennis player who is 2 matches away from completing the Grand Slam. Being incomparable or unmatched in a sea of the ordinary is a wonderful trait to have, especially when you are in the cannabis space. From the outside looking in, it is really hard to tell one name apart from the other, especially if you don't indulge in the product as I do. But let that be our secret for the time being. And if you see my parents at the event, make sure that you mention that my consumption is strictly medicinal. Unrivaled Brands, ticker UNRV, is one of the largest vertically integrated cannabis players on the West Coast, having operations in 3 states I frequent often: Oregon, Nevada, and you guessed it, California. Unrivaled is also the parent company of some of the most prominent brands in the space, including Kurova, Styx, and Cabana. The company is a result of the recent merger of TerraTech, a longtime presenter at our conferences, and Umbrella. UNRV is expected to generate $70 million in revenue this year and be cash flow positive in Q4. Joining us on the call today to discuss the West Coast MSO is the CEO of the company, Mr. Frank Nuttall. Frank, it has been far too long, and it is a pleasure seeing your face again. Welcome to Zooming with LD. The floor is now yours.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the introduction and being here with you all today. Good morning, everyone, for joining. So we're Unrivaled. I wanted to take a couple minutes and provide a brief overview of the company, and then Chris and I are going to go freewheeling into an open discussion. But I think a little bit of background would be helpful to provide everyone with context in the event that you are not aware of who we are. As Chris mentioned, we started out as TerraTech in approximately 2010, went public as a non-plant touching company in 2012, took a huge leap of faith and bought a dispensary in 2015 without any approval by the authorities or the SEC, and launched into plant touching. And we've been on an upward trajectory since, along with the cannabis markets overall in both the West Coast and nationwide, as you know. So we describe ourselves as the West Coast MSO. We have operations in California, Oregon, and Nevada. We are vertically integrated with a focus on strong brands. And as a way of sort of generating brand value, we anticipate or believe that having access to shelf space and menu placement is important. So I'll go into a little bit more of that in detail in a couple minutes, but just as a high-level summary. As I mentioned, we're vertically integrated in those 3 states, and we're the product of the merger with Umbrella on July 1st. Additionally, as part of our overall strategy, we're really looking to build up our operations specifically in the West Coast. And as part of that, we announced the acquisition of Silver Streak Solutions, which is a Sacramento-based delivery service, and People's Dispensaries. And the People's flagship dispensary in Orange County is probably the most prominent dispensary in all of Southern California. Further to the expectation that on a combined basis, Umbrella and TerraTech, now Unrivaled Brands, as we rebranded ourselves, would do $70 million in revenue in 2021. We believe that the TerraTech, Umbrella, Silver Streak, and People's merger will result in revenues in excess of $130 million in 2022. As part of our progress towards that, we anticipate being EBITDA positive in Q4 of this year, based on the growth in our revenue base and management of our expenses. We are OTCQX listed and have been for 9 years now. Have a very large shareholder base and platform on which to build the foundation of the growth of our company on the West Coast, along with a strong balance sheet to accommodate that. Some of this we've gone through just a moment ago, but we certainly believe that our footprint out here, especially in California and Oregon, is especially valuable. I think it's really instructive to note that our industry has a moat around it because of the federal legal status, and that prevents or inhibits the traditional consumer packaged good companies, tobacco companies, and beverage companies from entering the space. Additionally, and this is a strong part of our thesis, we have a moat around the West Coast because a lot of the large MSOs have largely avoided moving into especially Oregon and California and have focused more of their capital on limited license states in the East Coast. And given the fact that California is approximately a quarter of the national market and certainly the largest market in the world in and of itself, we believe it's only a matter of time until the large MSOs have to have a presence in the West Coast. But in the meantime, we have a period of lower competition that allows us to aggregate assets that are complementary with each other and allow us to build the largest West Coast-based MSO. So there's a little bit of a summary of our footprint. We have distribution, agriculture, and processing in Oregon, and that includes our primary brands led by Corova, and I'll talk about that a little bit more in a couple moments. Really deep footprint in California, both existing and in development, with dispensaries and cultivation in the East Bay, dispensaries and cultivation pending in the Southern California market, distribution hubs in Northern and Southern California, delivery hubs in Sacramento, which we anticipate opening in San Leandro at one of our dispensaries, as well as in SoCal, one of our other dispensaries. So we have a really strong and growing and deep penetration of the California market. In Nevada, we have cultivation, processing, and manufacturing. And then we also license our premium brand Corova in Arizona and Oklahoma. A little bit, digging in a little bit more detail, we really have 5 pillars led by our brands. As I mentioned, I think brands are the long-term value creator. And the way we get there in the meantime is by way of accessing shelf space in dispensaries or menu space and delivery options. Our 3 primary brands at this moment are Corova, Sticks, and Cabana. Corova is a high-end, high-potency, indoor-grown, flower-based product, although we have quite strong market presence in various edibles, including cookies. That was one of the first brands that was introduced, first legal brands that was introduced in California almost 10 years ago, and has been a mainstay of the California market since, and we've further expanded that now to Oregon. Sticks is our sort of lower end outdoor grown brand, and Cabana's very much of a lifestyle brand, and they all have different target markets and user consumption. As I mentioned, we skipped one. As I mentioned, we have 4 other pillars to our business. We have cultivation, retail, delivery, and distribution. So in cultivation, we have Oakland with 120 lights, Hagenberger with 240 lights, which I'm happy to announce we have plants in the ground today. So that was a project that we inherited when I joined that had been lying fallow for quite some time. And we are just formally opening that as of today. And then we have another large cultivation facility in Orange County that is also under development with planned opening in the middle of 2022. I think really where a lot of our efforts are going is towards retail. And at the moment we have 4 open retail, Santa Ana, 2 in Santa Ana, 1 in Oakland, 1 in San Leandro. We have additional facilities opening in downtown LA and Riverside that will be open at the end of this year or early next year, giving us a really large, well-established footprint of retail dispensaries. The People's OC Santa Ana, which we recently announced the acquisition of and took over management as of September 1st, is perhaps one of the most prominent dispensaries in all of Southern California and gets an enormous number of visitors on a daily basis. The additional dispensaries associated with that acquisition in Riverside and downtown LA are comparably located, and we anticipate being flagship operations for us as well. As I mentioned, we also have a delivery arm. We announced the acquisition of Silver Streak Solutions in Sacramento, earlier this summer, and we anticipate closing that in 3 or 4 weeks. That is moving very smoothly, and we anticipate expanding that operation to other of our facilities for local distribution or delivery in other markets. So we have the opportunity to blanket a large part of California. With respect to distribution, we have really strong distribution arms in Oregon and in California. In fact, we're one of the larger distributors in both states, both with our own brands as well as with complementary third-party brands, including Habit and Sarah. Our management teams, comprised of folks that have been in the industry for 3 or 4 years, but are largely mainstream folks in other industries. And I think that combination of some significant level of mainstream experience, as well as a number of years in cannabis, provides an excellent management team to execute on our vision and strategy. So that's it for my prepared remarks, or just a background of the company. And again, I want to thank everyone for joining us this morning.
Frank, thank you for the presentation portion. What we're going to do now is a little bit of Q&A. Let me kind of start by going back. So tell me kind of how the merger talks took place, and then what your relationship was with Umbrella before all this happened.
Sure. So the really, I think the thesis was very much where we ended up, and that is that the California and Oregon markets are a fairly protected market right now. The legacy TerraTech, as we call it, had, as I mentioned, a really strong investor base and platform. We had fortunately invested in Hydrofarm stock in 2019, and were able to monetize their position with that. So had a strong balance sheet. But frankly, TerraTech Legacy has been running $4, $5, $6 million a quarter in revenue, and that's just not large enough for a public company, or frankly a company in our industry. So a lot of it was born out of the desire to create a larger enterprise to become cash flow positive, and also one that supported the thesis that the West Coast market was, I think, key and vital in our growth trajectory. With respect to the actual details, there was a highly complementary business between the two operations, in that Umbrella had brands and distribution, and TerraTech had cultivation and dispensaries. And putting the two together provided a stronger base upon which to continue to build a company, and as I mentioned, bring on some of the additional firms that we've agreed to acquire.
So you've been in the space a long time, and have kind of seen
relatively, I might
relatively, yes, because cannabis has essentially in the last few years become one of the more popular spaces. Can you tell me what you learned at TerraTech in terms of partnerships, M&A, and stuff that you ultimately applied with Umbrella? Because I'm assuming that this was the transformative transaction.
It was the first of them, for sure. And a big part of it, frankly, is making mergers and acquisitions successful. So we've been very careful about the diligence work we've done, and screening the companies and making sure the assets and the operations are compatible. And by virtue of the merger with Umbrella, we brought together two complete disparate management teams, and working through that progress has facilitated the ability to provide a platform to bring on the additional ones. So the learning experience of the merger provided us with the opportunity to put in place the processes to bring on additional companies and do so successfully.
So let's talk about geography. Mm-hmm. So in this case, you guys are in California, you're in Nevada, and you're in Oregon. Mm-hmm. I'm assuming that California is probably an overwhelming majority of your revenues currently, correct?
It is based on just the the merged entities, Umbrella and TerraTech, it represents about 70% or 65%. As most of our new acquisitions have had are exclusively California or California specific, California will become even more important with respect to the total portion of the revenue.
On the regulatory side, are all three states relatively similar, or is it easier to do business in one of them than the others?
Yeah, ironically, no. I mean, the tragedy of the cannabis sector, because the federal illegality, is that every state has its own processes and rules and regulations. So it varies by state, and then even then, as you may know, in California, at the state level, it's legal, but it provides enormous amount of guidance, or allows the cities to provide their own set of rules. And so even within California, from city to city, it can be dramatically different. Ironically, despite the perception that California is very hard to deal with, and Nevada is a lot less so. In the cannabis sector, it might actually be the opposite. So Nevada has had a bit of a tough run the last couple of years. They had some regulatory mismanagement, you might say, and they had to overhaul the governing body in Nevada, and frankly, the process is different and far slower. So I would say that California might actually be a good deal easier in which to operate.
I just want to tell you that you stole some of my thunder, because I was going to go out on the limb and say that Nevada was probably the most lenient, where if they can just give you the paperwork and you can fill it out, it'll probably be approved. And I say this because I lived in Summerlin for 6 months. Right. A lot of people don't know this. One of my first jobs as an analyst was to analyze publicly traded casino companies. So what better place to do it than Vegas? But let's talk about Nevada for a second, because, you know, I think it was a couple years ago where they started. The concentration, I'm assuming, is predominantly Las Vegas and Reno. I mean, how has that market evolved, and has there been anything there that has surprised you?
Well, the rollout of Nevada started with approximately 60 dispensary licenses, and then about 3 years ago they rolled out an additional 50 or 60, and that's where the mismanagement occurred, and frankly, there's all sorts of allegations about impropriety and everything else. And it, you know, I guess that shouldn't surprise anyone. It's, you know, Nevada, but it ended up, you know, just causing quite a bit of tumult in the industry. During the downturn of COVID, it became apparent just how important the tourism business is to Nevada. So Nevada actually, you know, had a bit of a harder time during COVID than we did in California and Oregon. And in California and Oregon, it ended up being, I don't want to say flush, but it was a pretty good time to be a cannabis operator. And with a lot of folks, you know, being shut in, you might say, it ended up being a pretty fertile market. But in Nevada, it ended up being quite a bit of a harder time.
Well, I was going to say, the only line that I've stood in this year was to go to a dispensary, and it went out the door. And as you know, I'm assuming most of the transactions were done in cash. Can you give us some color as to what the cannabis market was, say, back in February of last year, and before the COVID dynamic, and what happened immediately after things shut down, people had to go inside? And how has it kind of changed, you know, as more things open up, as there's vaccinations? I'd really love to kind of know the dynamic between last year and this year for you guys.
Yeah, so I think just one anecdote. So I was operating in Colorado at the time, and in approximately March of 2020, the state came out and, you know, announced basically business closures. And you know, they left essential businesses open, but on the closed list were liquor stores and dispensaries. And that lasted exactly 91 minutes before the state retracted it and issued new guidance allowing dispensaries to be open as a essential business.
Yeah.
If you move over to, go ahead.
No, please. I was going to say very quickly, I'm sure in Sacramento, which we'll talk about in a second, in Sacramento, there's a section right by downtown called the Fab 40s, which are the biggest houses, most prominent houses in Sacramento, there are literally lobbyists, corporate executives that live in these homes. When they hear something happens in the immediate term, all they do is they walk down, walk down to the state capitol and say, what the hell is going on? I'm pretty sure that there was a few cannabis supporters in there. They're like, nope, not happening. If I'm staying home, this better be live.
Yeah.
They walked a few blocks to downtown Sacramento and they made the change. I'm just assuming that happened, but 91 minutes, huh?
Yeah, it was hilarious to experience. I mean, well, the first 90 minutes were a little bit concerning, but the 91st minute was both joyful and humorous at the same time. But in California, one of the major impacts, sort of pre-COVID and COVID, was delivery. So prior to COVID, there were some, I would say, higher levels of restrictions on delivery. Delivery was certainly early stages, but there was not, I would say, widespread adoption. But during the, sort of the COVID period in the early stages, some of the regulations were relaxed in some of the jurisdictions. Obviously, people became, a lot more, open to the concept of delivery because they didn't want to go into dispensaries. So I would say delivery saw a period of great growth during the second half of 2020. And while it's leveled off a bit in 2021, it hasn't fallen. So it's actually become, a key component of the industry and operating, at least in the California market.
Well, I was going to say, with demand comes issues. Did you guys have any problems on the manufacturing front, on the labor front, on the operational front?
It wasn't undue. The supply chain actually held up pretty well. And I guess one of the benefits of cultivation is it takes relatively few people in a fairly large facility to actually manage it. So you don't have, people necessarily very close together. If you look at post-harvest processing, you can space that out. So I would say the supply chain held up pretty well. I mean, with that said, I think the bigger issues we, as an industry, face is the supply chain is still early. I mean, the whole industry is early. There's a lot of analogies to where we are in a baseball game relative to the evolution of the industry. And there's all kinds of assessments as to whether we're in the bottom of the first, the top of the second, the bottom of the second, but we're clearly in the early stages of the game. So not necessarily because of COVID. I think it's just growth cycle issues with respect to the evolution of the industry and frankly, very considerable growth in demand. We're getting new consumers coming online all the time. That we hadn't had before as an industry and both at Unrivaled. So I think the bigger issue isn't really the COVID, but more just the significant growth in the industry that's causing just growth pains.
So I love asking this question for Zooming with LD because I'm always fascinated with how you are allocating your time during the day. Can you give all our listeners kind of a flavor of what your typical day looks like, where you put most of your concentration, and what you tend to splurge on when it comes to eating later in the evenings?
I wouldn't say there's a typical day. And part of it is because we have been very aggressive in, both sort of building and rebuilding the company. I would actually look at it more in phases. So I joined in December of 2020. And my first order of business was to, update the operations and fix the balance sheet. And, I conducted that initiative, and that took an enormous amount of my time during the first 60 or 90 days I was here. As part of that, we renegotiated existing debt. We got some of it paid off. We, updated the operational efficiencies, cut some staff, et cetera. I would say the next 90 to 150 days was a period of acquisition. So we went through an enormous number of companies in our pipeline that led us to both Peoples and Silver Streak Solutions. So a lot of my time during that period of my tenure was very much based on acquisitions. And if you've done acquisitions, there's very little in the way that's it's period specific or normal in that regard. And then I would say over the last 30 days is, we've gotten our core strategy of acquisitions down. We're now looking at executing. As part of that, a lot of it has been bringing the team together and making sure we're on target in all the abundant different initiatives we have with respect to opening 3 new dispensaries, 2 new cultivation operations, rolling out delivery throughout the state. So that's been a big part of it from a cyclical standpoint, as opposed to an individual day. The individual days, in a company that went from 5 million a quarter in Q1 to 6 million in Q2 to a significant multiple of that in Q3 with the merger, and then rolling in Peoples and Silver Streak in Q4. We're on a growth trajectory that will basically increase our quarterly revenue 6 to 9 times in the space of a 12-month span. So as for splurge on food, that I'm a big foodie, but frankly, I don't. My typical weeknight meal is a bowl of soup.
Yeah, no,
it's very plain. I don't splurge much during the week. It's much more of that.
Yeah, well, let me tell you, your day already is a hell of a lot more dynamic than mine. Mine is about 98% email. And then 2% behind you is a cabinet, and it's literally stocked with 6 months worth of peanut butter. So for those people who have kind of seen me evolve over the years, I went from 165 pounds to nearly 300 pounds back to 200 pounds. So my splurge is my only meal of the day. So I go in that cabinet behind you, and that spoonful of peanut butter just brings bliss beyond an elation that I can't even describe with words. But let's do this. Let's get the boring actuarial questions out of the way. So in terms of overall cost savings, I don't know if you guys disclosed to the street, how much cost savings did you guys have with this merger? And then what type of operational efficiencies still have not showcased themselves that will in the coming weeks, months, and years?
Right. So the cost savings were mostly done at the TerraTech level prior to the merger. The merger, as I mentioned, was very complementary from an asset base. And as a result, there was not an enormous amount of overlap at the management level or on the operating team level. So a lot of cost savings we did, in Q1 of this year with respect to thinning out the corporate overhead. A lot of it really was, building the revenue base to absorb the SG&A, and that was a big part of bringing the companies together. And what we look at going forward is frankly being able to manage a considerably higher level of revenue with the same management team. So that's a big part of getting us to cash flow positive.
On a cap structure basis, can you give us some color on how many shares outstanding, whether there's warrants? I don't think there's any convertible Series D, but I just want for the audience to get a consensus of the cap structure and how it's evolved.
Yeah, so one of your last points is particularly relevant. So one of my restructuring initiatives in Q1 was to get rid of all of the preferred stock. So we bought out and terminated the Series A and the Series B. So we are a common only cap structure right now. We have about 430 million shares outstanding. The merger with Umbrella was done completely stock 50-50. I will note that the merger brought us, our first major revenue jump in that Umbrella had a revenue base about 3 times that of TerraTech. So, we were very pleased with what that did for us. We do have a couple of convertible notes outstanding. It's about 3.5 million. So as a percent of the total, or it's pretty small. And there are warrants associated with that as well. But some of those are struck at a penny, and some of them are struck above market. All of which are locked up until early 2022.
Let's get into the meat, shall we?
Sure.
So look, cannabis if you're looking on the institutional side when it comes to microcap, it is something that everyone has interest, but they won't make it publicly known. And there has been several articles, and especially a prominent one in the New York Times recently, talking about the illegal market of cannabis, which is still monstrous. The black market is huge, and it's caused a lot of disruptions for the players that want to play by the rules. How has the illegal market in your eyes changed, and what type of factor do you see it having for you guys moving forward?
So actually, it's a really interesting point with respect to one of your earlier questions about the impact of COVID, and that is that there was some shift from illegal to legal amongst the consumer base, because the opportunity to take delivery or have to buy product that has been tested by independent testing laboratories, I think contributed to people's perception of well-being and true well-being, notwithstanding not having to meet someone in an alley around the corner during the period of COVID. So, there was a shift towards the legal market from the illicit market as part of COVID. But it does remain an issue. And I think, it's especially an issue in California and Oregon, where there's such a long history of the illicit market, or, we call it the illicit market now, but it frankly is the heart of the original, cannabis culture. With that said, I think many of the municipalities in the state are recognizing that, non-enforcement of the laws reduces tax revenue. So there is definitely an increased focus now on addressing the illicit market. It's going to be tough on the cultivation side, but certainly in the distribution delivery side, there's a lot greater focus on enforcement now than there was. So I think it'll take a while, but I think the trajectory is in the right direction, and I think it's a long-term support for the legal market in these states.
God forbid I ever run for political office, but if I choose to, I know that this next 2-3 minutes will probably cause me to basically step down. But I'm 38, and I grew up. My teenage years were in Santa Monica, California. So you put 2 and 2 together. There was a lot of cannabis consumption. A lot of my friends who have grown up with me over the years still have dealers, their own dealers. And I'm like, you guys, you can get this legally now. And they always cite 2 things: convenience and price. So on a pricing power basis, it's always going to be more expensive, purchasing your products because you guys are playing by the rules. How will pricing change for your brands with your growth curve? I mean, do you see prices really coming down? Do you see margins going up, or is it still going to be an expensive product to make moving forward?
So I'd actually like to make 2 points. One is a direct response, and then another point I'd like to make. So on the pricing,
your direct response is probably that I'm not going to win the recall of Gavin Newsom. I think you're right on that.
Well, actually, let me add a third one then. So first of all, it used to be a huge stigma to, cannabis used to have a huge stigma. I mean, if you think back at Bill Clinton, he never inhaled. I don't think, especially in California or Oregon or, a certain number of other states, where being a cannabis consumer will be harmful in your political pursuits going forward. So good luck on the gubernatorial election.
Thank you.
Or the recall election. The other point I'd like to make is on the illicit versus the legal, and some of your personal experience. One of the things that it doesn't really recognize is new consumers. So most new consumers who don't have a history of cannabis consumption are going to legal dispensaries, right? And there's been a pretty considerable influx of first-time users, older users, because of pain management or sleep management or any of a host of other things. So that gravitate immediately towards the legal. So if you're a 50, 60, 70-year-old person with no history of cannabis consumption, you're not going to go suddenly find a dealer. You're going to go to the dispensary down around the corner.
Of course.
So I think, that's part of the evolution towards the legal market, is that there's so many new consumers coming in, and so many whether they're older folks with no cannabis history, or even younger people where they're not forced into finding illicit supply.
Right.
So while there is definitely a price difference, and depending on your jurisdiction, there may not actually be much impact to just go down to the legal dispensary. With respect to the pricing, I think the wholesale market, and we're experiencing a little bit of that now, is softening, and I think we're going to use that as an opportunity to potentially lower prices a bit, but also capture more margin. So I think that, combined with the dynamics where the state is stepping up enforcement, we have so many new consumers with no cannabis history coming in, defaulting to the legal. I think we're actually in a really good position going forward as the market continues to evolve.
So I was talking with a prominent small cap mutual fund out of Boston yesterday, and we were talking about you guys because he missed yesterday's presentation, and he brought up a really good point. And his primary concern was cannabis is an extremely crowded marketplace, where it's literally it's a gold rush, kind of the early innings of a gold rush, if you will, and everyone is making claims about how great, how tasteful, how efficient, big highs, etc. With your respected brands, can you tell us a little bit about their histories and what makes them truly unrivaled as compared to the competition? Because look, I mean, I enjoy an edible every now and then. Okay, it relaxes me, if you will. It makes things more interesting. But when you go to the store, there's literally 50 products, and they all sound great. So what are you guys doing in terms of overall distinction and showcasing best of breed products?
Yeah, so that's a really valuable and important question, because there is very considerable number of brands out there. I think we're actually experiencing a bit of a shakeup, and I think the stronger brands are starting to elevate themselves amongst the many. And primary among those are our Kurova brand. So Kurova was one of the first legal brands in California. And one of the things that we've always has always been valuable to us is control of our source. So and that was part of also why the merger came together, is that TerraTech has really high quality indoor grow operations, and allows us to control every aspect of the product that goes into our flower jars. And as you know, the flower is still the largest component of the market. And by virtue of having very tight control over the strains we use, the environment we provide, the growth and of the plant, quality control, standard operating procedures, gives us really effective management of the long-term quality and preservation of the brand. And as part of the evolution of the industry, where weaker brands are shaking out, it's a really good opportunity for us with Kurova, having management of the product quality and the branding of it to rise to the top. It's very much we look at it as any other consumer packaged good. We strive to provide high quality consistency over time, and we look at Kurova a little bit. I don't know if you're a wine fan, an enophile, but we look at Kurova a bit of as a first growth Bordeaux, and we're really intent on maintaining that reputation that it's developed over the last 10 years.
Well, I was going to ask, because I tend to be a little bit more parsimonious on my cannabis purchases, sticks. So in terms of, I'm assuming that this is one of the more prominent value brands out there. What type of demographic is gravitating, and what's the typical price point for something with the Strix brand?
Well, at the risk of throwing my son under the train, my son's a college student, above 21,
Yeah.
and
Don't do it with your son. You can throw me. I've lost all feeling and emotion after being a microcap investor over the last 25 years. I
right.
won't feel a thing when it goes over me.
Yeah, so he is the sticks demographic tends to be the new entrants or the younger entrants to the market. It's an introduction to a legal brand at a lower price point. And part of much like someone who consumes wine, they start with I don't want to throw any brands out there, but some sort of cheap rosé or something, and they move up to better quality whites, and then maybe the better quality reds, and that's sort of the progression we look at with our sticks to Korova evolution, and the sticks is really the value brand, and we're trying to get customers educated and move them along the path towards the higher level brands, and specifically Korova.
So going back to my college days, we didn't have sticks. We had backwoods and we had King Cobras, and you could have bought them for less than $1. So how time has changed. Let's talk about Cabana. So, sure. I mean, Cabana just kind of seems, it's hard to elaborate on. Where do you feel Cabana's niche is? And there's one point.
So it's really very much of a lifestyle brand. If you look at it, it kind of screams beach. And so we have a lot more success with Cabana in the beach communities, both sort of regular consumers as well as tourist consumers. As you know, California and Oregon have a lot of tourist traffic. A little more prominent in Southern California with the beach scene, but that's really very much of a lifestyle feel good brand. Dedicated or directed at sort of the lifestyle consumer, casual weekend afternoon kind of consumption.
So my final question on M&A: do you feel that there will be a lot of companies over the next 3 to 5 years that will essentially run out of runway or no longer have any cash for operations that you guys can easily buy, nip tuck, and make it accretive? Or things are not as easy as I like to think that they are?
It's actually spot on. We're experiencing that very much in Oregon, California right now. There's been a divide in access to capital between public and private companies. So there's been a shift over the last year and a half, post, the capital markets were very cold to cannabis companies in 2019 and early 20. And coming out of that downturn, there's been a move towards public companies and away from private companies. So we're experiencing in Oregon and California especially a considerable number of good private companies that are stuck. They can't get capital to grow. And we are very much in an environment where the size of the operation is key. It's key to generating cash flow. It's key to being access, or having a major access to new markets as they open new municipalities. So a lot of the private companies, are very much stuck where they can't grow and they need to find an outlet. So there's a very big pipeline. With that said, as I've indicated, we've been very acquisitive the last 4 or 5 months, and we're really, we're working on 1 or 2 more smaller ones that may or may not happen. But we're really in a phase of execution right now, and don't see that the capital markets are going to become any more kindly to the private companies. So I think the opportunity to pick up private company assets in California and Oregon is going to remain good for quite some time, and frankly may even get better.
I promise. Final M&A question. You guys bought Silver Streak. For people who don't live nearby, because I only live an hour and 15 minutes away from Sacramento, Sacramento's growth in terms of population, in terms of business, in the last 10 to 20 years is truly unrivaled. Tell us about kind of the history of that purchase and what you foresee for Silver Streak moving forward, because how can I put this? It's growing when U-Haul says that the most expensive city to go to is Sacramento in the entire.
Really? Wow. That's
That
impressive.
was an incredible tidbit that I found out. So, so tell us about that, because I feel that a lot of people are like, Sacramento, who cares? But it's truly evolving very quickly.
Yeah, so that we were introduced to Sterling Harlan, the founder and CEO of Silver Streak, back in approximately May, and hit it off really well with him. He did a tremendous job building Silver Streak into one of the largest, if not the largest, delivery operator in the Sacramento area, and he's done a wonderful job in putting that together and putting a really high quality team together. And our strategy is to take that platform and the call center operations and their processes and lift it up and drop it into other facilities. So we anticipate opening delivery in the East Bay in October, in SoCal in November, and then in other operations as we continue to expand throughout the state. So we're really looking at, Silver Streak for us was an opportunity to get really good delivery talent, and a set of procedures and a platform upon which to expand throughout the state.
During our call, I got a text, so I have to kind of mention what was said. A keen investor noticed, they looked at the map and they said, how come you guys aren't showing any love for Fresno County or Central California? I probably know the answer to that question, but I will plead the fifth. Why is it that you guys aren't in Fresno County as of yet?
Well, it's really a function of just how much we can do and how quickly we can do it, right? So in the 9 months I've been at the helm, the first 3 months were largely fixing the operation that I took over, and then we entered into the M&A phase. And since then we've announced the acquisition of Silver Streak and Peoples. We've merged Umbrella and TerraTech together. We have one or two other things in the pipeline, as I mentioned, that may or may not work out, but are looking positive. And really, it's just a function of how much we can fit through the straw at one time. We've got a really strong and solid management team, very dedicated. We're all rowing together, but we've got a lot to do in opening. In the next 6 months, we're going to open 3 dispensaries that are very sizable, well located. We're going to open 2 additional cultivation facilities. We're going to expand delivery to 3 more locations in California. That's a lot of work we've got to do. So it's not a function of the fact that Fresno is unimportant. It's more a function of the fact that we're growing at a very considerable clip right now, and we need to absorb what we're doing first.
So final topic, let's talk about marketing. It's very easy to overspend in this category. Kind of tell us what your mindset is and how you're putting that money to work to get people to know more about your brands.
Yeah, so a large part of what drives our marketing thesis is the sort of the collective set of operations, and by that I mean, we are putting delivery in our dispensaries, and we're doing that in a manner that sort of enhances both. I think that's key from both an operational standpoint, in that we can leverage fixed overhead in facilities and inventory, as well as the people, but also, frankly, to extend the brand name through multiple modalities. And by that I mean brick and mortar and delivery. So those combined modalities are in and of themselves a really strong marketing tool for us. To your point, it can be very expensive, some of the various services to market, but our focus has really been on combining the modalities, working on adjacent billboards, and frankly having really prominent locations. As part of that, the People's OC dispensary we just acquired is right on the highway. It has highway signage, is right at the bottom of an off-ramp, and that in and of itself, just by virtue of its location and its ability to put up a billboard, provides it with unbelievable marketing presence.
Well, let me tell you this, Frank. The next time you're either in Oakland or Sacramento, please let me know, because I want to do some due diligence with you. Bring your marketing team. I'm tough to impress. And then watch how I change in the coming 2 to 3 hours.
Yeah, I guess I may not run for office either after saying that I've done plenty of my own due diligence as well.
Oh
Uh,
yeah, no, no. It's like, I'll see you in the parking lot, but in a very happy-go-lucky
right.
way. Um, okay, so let's talk about marketing in terms of IR too, because this is something that a lot of executives don't talk about. How has perception changed in your eyes when it comes to both the retail and the institutional aspect when it comes to investing in cannabis? Are there bigger funds looking at stories like yours? And what is the message that you want them to know about what you do and the industry in general?
Yeah, it's still, for institutional investors, it's still a bit of an uphill climb. We have at Unrivaled, we have about 200,000 shareholders. Very
Wow.
just, yeah, we have a really strong platform, a public platform. Um, but it tilts very strongly to retail. And getting institutional investors is still an uphill climb. I definitely see every month some new institutional investor says, okay, I'm ready.
Yeah.
And it's a constant education, but it's working slowly. And part of our conversation today, as well as other conversations I have, is really educating institutional investors and bringing them along, that it's okay to invest in cannabis these days. As part of which, we have, as I mentioned, a management team that comes from the mainstream, and has 3 or 4 years of cannabis experience, but has a lot of experience with what I'll call mainstream industries, and bring to Unrivaled a level of professionalism and governance and operating procedures that our industry has not always been well known for.
Right.
So historically, and kudos to all the folks that jumped in 09 and 10 and 12 and 14, big gambles to do so, based on the legal environment, and truly entrepreneurial, truly stepped up. But we're in light of the unbelievable growth of the industry across different states and within the states, and how crazy the legal environment was. Things like governance and process weren't always first things to be tackled. So we bring a lot of that to Unrivaled, and that's a major part of how we're trying to bring along and educate institutional investors as well.
I can only speak for myself, but as an investor, I've definitely been dabbling, and I feel that we're kind of reaching an inflection point from separating the men from the boys, if you will. So my stance is cannabis is still very early innings. It is going to become a much, much bigger segment and sector of the overall economy 5, 10, 20 years from now. And there is going to be a lot of consolidation on the high end too, where there's going to be companies that are going to look at brands, that you've cultivated, and realize that there's significant value and interest there. Wanted to give, before I forget, a huge shout out to Jason in terms of your IR efforts. I think he's doing a great job. But what's kind of like the number one thing that guys just don't get, even after a 20-minute presentation, 30 minutes, or in this case, almost an hour with me? What's that one thing that if you can just teach them, it would make your life a lot easier and our lives a lot easier?
A big part of it is, TerraTech, was founded in 2010, has a long history, and there's good and bad associated with that. And certainly my predecessors made a lot of good decisions. And, frankly, I think they stumbled a couple places. And I think the biggest part of what I'm trying to convey to our investor base and the shareholders and the public is that we're a different company from where we were, and we have a very focused outlook on what we're doing. We're specifically working on the West Coast market. We think it's incredibly fertile ground right now. We're on a very significant growth trajectory, and I certainly appreciate with the history that investors need to start seeing the numbers, and that's what we're working on. But I want to convey that we're really a very different, highly focused company, and I think we're going to be, as you point out, I think we're going to be one of the winners versus one of the also rans, and because I think there's very much going to be a continuing wave of consolidation for years, and we want to be a consolidator, not a consolidatee.
Final question. And it's kind of a silly one, if you will. You know how when you go to Costco, Frank, they all, I don't know if they do this post COVID, but I don't think they do, but they used to have kind of like, you go around the store and you got to try free samples. Okay. Will that ever happen in cannabis, where you and I can go into a dispensary and the guy knows us, he knows what what we like. It's like, hey, can I give you a dab? Because I haven't seen anyone do this. And is there a reason for not doing it?
It's the answer to the first question is yes. I think we'll get there. The legal environment, as we've chatted a little bit about, is very much at the state and sometimes the municipality level, and they're all growing and evolving at different rates. And I think we will get there. I think it's going to be bumpy and it's going to vary by jurisdiction, but I think we'll get to the point at some time where we can sample. Now, the regulatory environment just doesn't support it. And, and we're very much, we have, all sorts of regulatory issues we comply with, and we want to comply with them because that's the focus. So I think we'll get there. I just think it's going to take a little time.
So definitely in the next few weeks, I'm giving you a warning. I'm going to be a secret shopper of yours. I'm going to, kind of dress down, wear some, discarded shorts and a really bad New York Mets t-shirt and go in and see how the entire process goes. But I trust that they're going to be extremely knowledgeable. What's crazy is how knowledgeable people are at the stores. I mean, they really know their SHIT. But look, that's give it time. And as soon as I do that, I'll definitely give you a buzz. Where can people go to find out more on the company?
So we have, first place would be our website, www.unrivaledbrands.com. And we have a very robust investor relations component to that, which has both SEC filings as well as printed materials and interviews. So that's a great place. It has our presentations. Certainly, as you point out, Jason Assad is a tremendous asset, and Jason and I have worked together for many years, and he's highly responsive in responding to investor inquiries. So he's been a great addition to the team, and frankly is supporting the overall mission of educating our investors. So combination of website and direct questions in through Jason are probably the best accesses to information.
Yeah, the guy is a tank. I mean, he's the only person that emails me at 3:15 in the morning. So, either he is sleep deprived or he really cares. But either way, Jason, if you're listening, kudos to you. Frank, it's been, so let me preface this. I apologize if there was a question that was either emailed to me or on the Q&A that we did not get to. I apologize for that. I was having too much fun with Frank. If you still want to ask it, please email me at chris@ldmicro.com, and I'll make sure that your question gets answered. Frank, I'm cautiously optimistic that I'll see you next month for the main event.
You absolutely will. I think I locked in my slot, and I'm very much looking forward to being back in person with people.
Hell yeah, me too. So let me, so look, I'm looking forward to seeing you in the flesh. Thank you again for your time today, and best wishes moving forward.
I appreciate it, and thank you very much. It's good to see you again.
Likewise. Be well.
Bye well.